I'm Pat Torres. Welcome to The Story. If you're watching us live, you know it was a gorgeous, warm spring day out there today. So nice. And what a contrast to the snow and ice storm we had about 2.5 months ago. There's a new report out on how Multnomah County did in terms of shelters during that storm. Remember how they closed them while the bitter cold and icy conditions still continued? Well, that report is our big story tonight. Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson asked her employees to hammer out an after-action report looking at what went right and what went wrong during the big ice storm in mid-January. It's not exactly an unbiased review from an outside consultant, but they do give a nod to a couple of obvious things that the rest of us saw. So, in my opinion, the report is valuable because it at least lets us know that they know that the system for gathering volunteers and the metrics for closing the shelters needs to get a lot better. All right, here's the cover page. It certainly looks cold and stark, and it was. Remember the high winds and the lows in the 30s? The county opened 12 emergency shelters for folks living out on the streets and kept them open for 5 nights. The report points out they also helped expand 2 other shelter locations and pivoted to opening 3 distribution points when they closed the shelters too soon and kicked everyone out into the cold. They didn't write that, but that is what happened. In the lovely bureaucratic language of the county, the report states, despite numerous successes and the ability to support the community during this long event, opportunities for improvement were also identified, and questions arose regarding the final closure time and date. And a bit lower down it states, the event was also an opportunity for further learning and improvement in the way the county prepared for and responds to seasonal emergencies. I love that language. Now, at the time, at least a couple of county commissioners were pretty frustrated with the county chair and the COO for making the decision to shut down the shelters at least a day too soon. Here's what Commissioner Sharon Myron told me back then.
I thought it was abhorrent.
How come?
I mean, for so many reasons. The bottom line is just from a common sense human standpoint of thinking about people who are most vulnerable in our community, who are getting respite and warmth and shelter from the storm, and you're basically kicking them out into the ice and cold. And that, to me, that just shocks my conscience.
Okay, so now the county's had time to reflect on what went right and wrong. What went right? Well, people used the shelters. 1,300 people stayed over 3 nights. That's a 19% increase over the old record. 3,500 different shifts were filled by workers. That's double the old record. And 1,200 people worked those various shifts. That's a 50% increase from before. Okay, nice, good work, everyone. Now, here are some of the opportunities for growth. Number 1, expand support from partners during large-scale shelter operations. Yeah, bring in more people. Use fewer locations that are bigger. Identify and train shelter staff year-round. Flexible planning when forecasts change. Now, I don't know how much it cost to produce that report, but I got to tell you, I hope it wasn't much, because it was so obvious what needed to be fixed that I spelled it out for free to county leaders way back in mid-January. But here is another question I've been thinking about. Why is it that every time we have a snowstorm or an ice storm like this, it feels like the very first time our county has ever experienced it? I mean, I sort of want to issue a warning right now. We're going to have some really hot days this summer. Hopefully you'll start to give a little planning thought to that. This should not be new, you guys. Why is there not a template that someone can pull off a shelf and say, oh, ice storm. Okay, yes, here we are. Here's all the shelters that we use. Here's all the staff that have been notified that part of their job is working in a shelter if needed. Here's a list of people who have other lists of people who have volunteered. Let's put it in action right now. Seems pretty simple. Folks, we have 803,000 people living in Multnomah County. Is it crazy to think that we could get 2,000 or 3,000 trained up and ready to volunteer every winter for the homeless emergency shelters? I don't think so. And if we had that in place, it would be no big deal to keep the shelters going until the snow and ice melted, which is common sense. By the way, the heat is still coming. I hope you're ready. I emailed the county to see how they're going to implement the findings in their report. A spokeswoman said, actually, 2 points had already been put into action. During a February storm, the county planned for it to last longer than it did, and they had the staffing and supplies geared up for that longer time. Another recommendation was to keep security at the emergency shelters, so they did that during the February storm. They also did talk to the city of Portland about working with each other better during these storms. However, no word on year-round recruiting and training of volunteers. Speaking of Multnomah County, 80 asylum seekers, including more than 30 children, could end up on the streets of Portland by the end of the week. Yeah, you heard that right. It's because the nonprofit that's helping them out ran out of money for their temporary housing. And when the nonprofit asked the county to help, well, guess what the county did? They offered them tents. I kid you not, tents. The city then stepped in to keep a roof over their head, but only for a few more days. Blair Best has our story.
Inside a hotel by the Portland airport, 80 asylum seekers are on borrowed time.
Me llamo Gabriela Morales, soy venezolana, vengo de Venezuela.
This is Gabriela. She and her daughter left Venezuela for America 6 months ago. She was told she'd find help in Portland as she waits for her asylum claim to process.
Yo pasé mucho trabajo en Chicago, no teníamos nada y me dijeron que aquí era mejor, que estaba aquí mejor, que si había trabajo, que si ayudaban aquí.
A local nonprofit called Emerge has been paying for her to stay in this hotel for the past month. That nonprofit ran out of money last week. Gabriela tries not to think about it.
No quería ni siquiera pensar en eso porque en realidad no tenemos a dónde irnos.
So again, 80 people that make up 20 families, including 30 children, all under the age of 12, could end up on the street come the end of this week.
The money had just run out. The organization couldn't pay any longer, and so we were looked at as a resource.
Grace Zarpak is a policy advisor for Commissioner Renee Gonzalez. They spent about $10,000 from their own budget to keep the families in the hotel for one more week. That ends this Friday. So they've asked the county to step in, and we're told they gave them 24 four-person tents.
It's a heightened concern. We are very concerned because with tents doesn't come hygiene, being able to go to the bathroom, shower, things like that.
Dennis Therault is a spokesperson for Multnomah County.
We're seeing so many folks coming here, and we have this group of folks, we have so many other folks who have come through. And I think the chair's office is a little disappointed in the state a little bit for not coming up with even more resources.
Does the county see tents as a humane solution here?
We're talking about doing more than tents. So that was some of the discussion, if there couldn't be anything else worked out for those folks. But like I said, we are in conversations with the partners about how we can fill the gap in the short term for those folks and also going forward.
The prospect of offering tents with no place to place them to 80 refugees, including 39 children, is unconscionable.
The nonprofits supporting these families told KGW in an email that they're grateful for the city's response. They know no one wants to see children sleep outside. A nightmare, closer to becoming reality for mothers like Gabriela.
No sé qué decirle, lo que queremos es que nos ayude, que por eso se ha hecho lo que se ha hecho y hemos buscado de tratar la manera de que vean que necesitamos la ayuda en realidad, porque no tenemos a dónde irnos, estamos aquí esperando.
Now, we're still waiting to hear back from the governor's office on all of this, but Renee Gonzalez, he's looking for long-term solutions. He's meeting with the Red Cross tomorrow and looking at the University of Portland for any potential housing options there. Pat.
Blair, I gotta say, this is just incredible to me. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that have not yet been spent by the county for homeless services, and we are spending tens of millions of dollars trying to keep people off the street, and here they are putting 80 people onto the street? It really is hard to believe.
Right, and you know, the sad reality of all of this is if they do end up in a tent on the sidewalk, it's probably just a matter of time before the city comes around and clears that tent.
Ugh. It's amazing. And then they'll be handed tents again, and it goes on and on. Now, I've talked to you about some of the folks that you interviewed, and we noticed that a lot of them have an ankle monitor on. And I'm pretty sure that that's done so that it's easy for immigration officers to keep track of where they are. And we're not saying they're here illegally. They are going through the official asylum process. So what sort of support comes with people like these asylum seekers?
Well, Pat, federal law restricts asylum seekers from working for over a year once they get here. And even once they file their paperwork for a job, it sometimes takes months for that to process. Also, they don't qualify for any federal assistance for housing, so they have to rely on general public programs and activists for help. The county says that they accept asylum seekers every month, and some Portland nonprofits say they take in 3 families a week. That nonprofit that ran out of money, they've helped more than 300 asylum seekers in the past 2 years and spent $28,000 on hotel rooms since October. I'll also point out here that there's no official tracking mechanism for how many asylum seekers have come to Oregon.
That's interesting. It never occurred to me that it was so many, and it seems crazy that we don't know exactly how many. All right, what about the young mother and her child?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. They're left hoping that someone will step in and help them. And during that interview with the young mom, her daughter chimed in and said, "I wish you could just send me to school during the day so you didn't have to worry about me."
Oh, that tugs at your heartstrings for sure. All right, thank you, Blair. Great reporting as always. Moving on now to some of your thoughts on our big story from last night, which was all about the power of artificial intelligence when it comes to manipulating pictures, video, and even voices. With huge elections coming up next month and in November, we wanted to show you the things to watch for so that you can spot a fake from AI, maybe even educate your family and friends so that they don't get duped either. If you missed the segment last night, you really should carve out some time for it after tonight's show. But here's what other viewers had to say about it. Vern wrote in, "Great job on the AI story last night. This is the best reporting I've seen all year. Your expert nailed it when saying that the only real protection against a slew of fake news is an educated, intelligent, and skeptical, show me the proof, audience. Gives me hope." And a viewer with a name that I like, Pat, told us, "Your expert AI guest was amazing. I am an AI chicken, my age and suspicious nature. I dread it becoming common. I learned a lot from Al Tompkins," that was our expert. "Thanks for having him on the air. Now a well-informed chicken." Ellen found the segment useful as well, writing, "I've been bumping into the information on AI, but was just getting bits and pieces and not really grasping the importance and what to look for in determining if the information was altered. I will work at not taking things at face value, especially before reposting." Nice work. And we'll end on this nice one from Dan. "You have very pleasantly surprised my wife and I, and have now discovered that many of our friends agree. Your programming choices and factual reporting are rebuilding our trust. TV reporting can be relevant and important. I hope there's a way for you to share your AI program with the national network." Thanks for that, Dan. Thanks to everyone for your feedback. It helps drive our decision making moving forward. Coming up next on the story, we're going to talk about psilocybin, otherwise known as magic mushrooms. Oregonians passed a law back in 2020 to set up the nation's first legal framework for people to trip on the drugs. Our system has been up and running now since last summer, so how's it going? Depends on who you ask. We'll have the details when this story returns. Let's get to a story now that we think is worth your time. It's about a doctor who at first glance, you might have some questions about. I know that I did when I was reading this. He lost his medical license in 2 states, but now he's running a psilocybin practice or magic mushroom facility in Northwest Portland.
This is a story about a guy who at first glance looks like exactly the wrong kind of person to run a psilocybin service center in Oregon. But in fact, if you spend some time with him and learn his history, you learn that he might be maybe the right guy, maybe exactly the right guy to run a psilocybin service center in Oregon.
I love this story. That's Anthony Effinger. He's a reporter at the Willamette Week. He wrote the story. He recently did the story on Dr. Frank Danger Lee. And yeah, that really is his middle name. He ran a chain of pain clinics in Washington State, but his license was suspended back in 2016. The state says the drugs he prescribed led to the deaths of 18 people. Effinger says on its face, yeah, that does look pretty bad. But when he dug in more and talked with Dr. Lee for several hours, he learned it's maybe not so simple.
Listen, if you look at Frank Lee's side of the story, he'll say he was, one of the last clinics standing that would help these people, and that he got a lot of people, thousands of people, off of opioids. Now the state has a different take on that. They say he overprescribed and was running a pill mill. And what we tried to do in our story is show those 2 sides.
All right. Despite losing his license in Washington, the Oregon Health Authority granted Dr. Lee a license to run a psilocybin practice here in Oregon. And he put a lot of money into deciding a place to administer his magic mushrooms.
He decided to plunge headlong into the approval process and the bureaucracy, which is substantial, right? The Oregon Health Authority puts you through the ringer when you want to open a psilocybin service center. And he chose to do that. And, they took extra time with him, by the way. OHA said they opened an investigation when they got a complaint about his background, and they paused his application process, did the investigation, and then decided he was okay to approve. So yeah, Frank put himself through, a regulatory process that a lot of people in Oregon who are dealing with psilocybin are not doing.
So there's that. There's much more to the story, by the way. It really does have you rethinking your perspective actually several times as you're reading it. So we think you should really check out the full story. It's right now posted on wweek.com. And while we're talking about the psilocybin industry, another recent article in Willamette Week, yeah, okay, we do read it a lot. It caught our attention. It's a great newspaper. You should read it. This one by Grant Stringer. It's all about the first psilocybin service center to close its doors in Oregon. The Journey Service Center was in Portland's Gateway neighborhood in northeast Portland, and the co-owners told Willamette Week the business was pretty good in the fall when they opened up, but then things kind of lagged. If you do any research into legal psilocybin services in Oregon, the first thing you'll see is that it is notoriously expensive to get up and running. We're talking for a customer as well, at least a couple $1,000s for a single trip or appointment. That's pretty steep for the average person trying to get help for things like anxiety, addiction, or trauma. The prices are so high, for the most part, because of the strict state rules and expensive licenses that are required every step of the way, from the people who grow the mushrooms, to the labs where they're tested for potency, to the service centers where you take the psilocybin, and the facilitators who guide you through the process. It is license, 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 which translates to cost, cost, cost. And that's the balancing act going on now in Oregon's psilocybin industry. The cost to operate and the ability or not to make a profit, which depends on the price the customers are willing to pay. The Oregon Health Authority started accepting licenses for applications in January of 2023, with service centers opening in the summer of 2023. So here's the lay of the land right now. There are 9 licensed manufacturers or growers in this state. Only 2 labs, so a bit of a bottleneck in the system there. 24 service centers across the state, although, with this story, it could be 23 now. And nearly 300 licensed facilitators. If you've taken part in Oregon's legal psilocybin program and are willing to share your story with us, send us an email, will you? We'd love to hear from you. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. And if you'd like to learn more about the first psilocybin service center to close, with some quotes from the co-owners who have decided it's no longer worth it, check out this article on wweek.com. Still to come on the story. It's been called a reckless plan, all meant to save the Northwest's beloved or not spotted owl. The feds are proposing a new plan to kill thousands of different owl species in order to help the smaller spotted owls out. But that lethal idea has plenty of opposition. We'll explain when the story returns. We're going to talk about owls now. Have you ever seen an owl out in the wild or maybe heard one? I haven't seen one, but I have heard one. In fact, I live over by Irving Park in Northeast Portland, and there's an owl out there right now. I heard him just the other night. Hoo-hoo. It's my best impression. Anyway, it felt kind of magical in the city, but they can be kind of an interesting species. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is considering a plan to basically eliminate barred owls, a type of owl, from the West Coast. Why? Because they're bigger and more aggressive and taking food habitat away from native spotted owls. By eliminate, we do mean, yes, eliminate, kill. And not a few owls here and there. We're talking about thousands. And yes, there is plenty of controversy about this proposal. Erica Zucco from our Environment Northwest team explains.
Barred owls are native to the East Coast, but migrated to the West and multiplied quickly. Supporters of the plan say that it's a difficult decision, but necessary. Opponents say it's inhumane.
The decades-long fight to protect the northern spotted owl sparked an endangered species listing and laws to reduce logging and protect old-growth forests.
Here he comes.
But despite those efforts, their numbers continue to decline.
This is a species on the brink. There's not a lot of hope unless we act urgently and at a scale required to prevent extinction.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife's latest proposal to take urgent action includes a measure that's been discussed and studied for over a decade, killing thousands of barred owls in the Northwest. On first glance, the birds look similar, but barred owls are larger, eat a broader range of prey, and multiply more quickly than spotted owls. Fish and Wildlife says eliminating most of them in Washington, Oregon, and California would remove competition and give them a better chance at survival. But conservationists are split. A letter issued to the feds this week by a coalition of groups takes issues with the studies Fish and Wildlife used to support what it calls a, quote, reckless plan, and argues it would cause severe disruptions to wildlife.
The animals need to work it out between themselves. This is an issue in some ways of barred owls being scapegoated for what are underlying habitat protection challenges.
But groups like Birds Connect Seattle say while the idea of killing barred owls is gut-wrenching, something must now be done to solve the, quote, problem for which we humans are responsible. And it supports the management plan with some conditions.
This is an issue that reasonable people can disagree on, and it's not something that we took lightly or enjoyed having to weigh in on. But we really do think that lethal removal of barred owls is what we have to do urgently if we do want to protect the spotted owl from extinction.
Birds Connect Seattle says that the conditions on its support mean that it also wants to see aggressive habitat protection, action on rodenticides, and it wants some questions answered about the location selected for barred owl management. Erica Zucco, King 5 News.
Man, that is a tough one, huh? All right, we'll keep you updated on that. Later this week, by the way, Cale Williams is going to be sitting down with Oregon Governor Tina Kotek to talk about environmental issues. So what's on your mind when it comes to climate-related issues? Are you worried that the state's not doing enough about climate change? Or maybe that the solutions they've put in place are going too far? What about renewable energy or the timber harvest? We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking about, will you? Email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We'll pass your questions along to Cale and hopefully you'll be able to bring it up to the governor. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, well, that never ends. The good stuff's coming your way next. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.